Good evening, everybody. Let's call the Tuesday, June 11th Financial Affairs Committee meeting to order. My name is Dan Shultz, I'm co-chair, and Mr. Swagger, I believe, that's the baton to you. Roll call. It's the summer. We could do these things. We could do these things. Yeah, we will start with roll call, and then I guess I'll entertain a motion to approve the minutes. But Ms. Blitzstein, could you please?
Mia Blitzstein, present.
Charles Burdell Williams, present. Zachary Epps, present.
William Mulhern, present.
Ross Whiting, present.
Robin Murphy, present.
Dan Schultz, present. And now, would anybody like to make a motion to approve last month's minutes?
So
Second, all in favor?
Aye.
Motion passes. Now I will hand the baton. Thank you.
Thank you, Dan. So good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Finance Committee meeting. Just when you thought it was getting more exciting, here we are talking about numbers and next year's budget. All right, so tonight we're going to cover, as usual, our interim financial statements through the end of May 31st, 2024, and compare it to last year. We're going to look at a projection through the end of this year, through June 30th, 2024, the end of our fiscal year, to help us make a decision and accept a proposal about next year's final budget. We're going to talk about the proposed final budget for 24-25 and the upcoming legislative agenda items that need to be approved along with the adoption of the budget at the next special meeting of the board on June 25th, 2024. All right, so I think we've beaten the interim financial statements to death throughout the year, and again, we still have our strong financial position. We have $55 million in cash through May 31st, 2024 versus 47 last year. So an $8 million increase in cash is generally a sign of a strong financial performance for the year. Looking down at the summary of revenue and expenditures for the year, year to date, our revenues are very similar to the prior year. We have $122 million collected to date versus $122 million collected last year. Almost exactly the same number. The expenditure side tells a little bit of a different story. Through the end of May, we incurred $109 million of expenditures this year versus $104 million of expenditures last year. Too far. So let's take a look at what that means. When we look at the revenue side, our total revenues are, yes, they're almost identical year to year. But you can see our federal source revenue is a little slower on the collection side this year. We're still awaiting payments on some of our title monies, and we're still awaiting payments on some of our ESSER money. They're a little slow in the cash flow side this year. On the revenue side, last year we had a tax increase, as you may recall, anticipated $900,000 in additional revenue for the year. But we did see some decreases in some of our local revenues. As you recall, last year our real estate transfer tax was reaching an all-time high. That is not where it was this time last year, and our delinquent tax collections have decreased significantly from the prior year, which isn't necessarily a bad thing, but impacts our cash flow of our real estate tax revenue. On the expenditure side, sorry, I have my notes here. On the instructional side, the number of teachers was slightly less than the prior year, so we have a very stable expenditure year-to-year category on the instructional side. Some of our teaching resources were switched to special programs. As you recall, we took in our autistic program 2 years ago, and we continue to evolve and appropriately staff those functions, those departments. Also corresponds with an increase with some of our paraprofessionals. So that makes up a large portion of this $1.7 billion increase in special programs. There's also an additional $400,000 in access money spending. Access money is federal reimbursable expenditures we submit through the IU, and they take that amount of spending and they return back to us in forms of credits we can use for expanded special programs. So we hadn't really been taking advantage of that money in the past. This year, we went ahead and started using it to enhance some of our programs. So this 400,000 of this $1.7 million increase is that access. There's still ESSER money sprinkled throughout the year-to-year change. We approximately have spent $1 million more this time versus last year. So this $4.8 million increase in expenditures, approximately $1 million, is ESSER related. It isn't a true budgetary increase. And we just talked about that 400,000, which is access related, which isn't really a true budgetary increase either. So when you look at counselors, we have counseling grants, we have ESSER money spent on professional development. Same goes with our curriculum spending. Some of our professional development literacy coaches are all flowing through our instructional services. And the last item we always look at is transportation, another large increase. That is our 10% contractual increase year to year. So when we look at our graphical representation of our structural stability, you can see we had a slight uptick in January and February. This probably corresponds with our debt payments, which are February and March, and corresponds slightly with our settlement of our sports code contract, which we had a lot of as you know, that was settled for the years. So we had retroactive pay through this period and the corresponding PCERS contributions. But here we still have a growing gap. And if we were to collect all of our federal revenue monies due today, this would also have an upward trajectory as well. So it's a little less settled this year than it was at the same time last year. Back to those local revenues. So as you recall, we approved the tax rate, expected a $900,000 increase in taxes. To date, only realized a $541,000 increase in taxes, but we did have a $330,000 TIF payment that we pulled out of this revenue line. That was for the Elkins Estate for the development of that property. So that almost fully accounts for the expectation in this category. Our delinquent taxes, fortunately, have rebounded some. If you recall, we were $200,000-300,000 less than last year in prior months, and now that gap is closed. But we're still less than prior years. We're still less on the real estate transfer tax side. And of course, our investment earnings continue to be incredibly strong. All right, what does the end of the year look like? I think it's more helpful to look at our end of year 2023 projection versus our actual results. Because as you know, the budget is largely an estimation, not necessarily actual. So looking at how we actually ended this year versus how we actually ended the prior year tells more of a pragmatic story. So the couple areas I want to point out. One, transportation. We've been talking about this for the past couple months. This was the intermediary unit, early intervention, and pre-K program transportation costs passed through the EIU. There's some of the $1.8 million that was charged to Cheltenham School District this year was related to prior years during COVID. I have a nice graphical representation of that going forward when we talk about the budget. But that was, and a somewhat unexpected hit, I guess, the size of it. And when we look at our regular programs, our teaching costs from year to year, we have a $2.7 million increase. So when we get to the end of the year, our largest payroll obviously is the last payroll in June. We have our some payments to our teachers. I think we'll have more clarity on this number. This is a very conservative estimate, so hopefully we don't quite see this kind of increase year over year. But the summation of this spreadsheet is we're looking at an approximate $4.5 million surplus through the end of this year through my conservative estimation of our projection today. All right, lots of numbers, right? Here we have the prior year budget, the projection we just looked at, all juxtaposed next to the proposed final budget. Obviously later, if you want to look at this more in detail, feel free, but this column here is our proposed final budget. That wasn't very straight. So this is the budget you take home with you. Sorry, not my humor. The final budget. And
I just.
You just got.
Actually. Oh my gosh.
I
just-
The way
so
Unbelievable.
there isn't much difference between this budget and the preliminary budget, other than this transportation costs that we're trying to absorb. So if you recall, in February, when we discussed the preliminary budget, we were showing a $900,000 deficit. We still were waiting on a lot of expenditures to come in. We were waiting on a lot of things to be resolved. We did have to absorb a $1.5 million increase to our transportation budget. We did find savings elsewhere. Obviously, we're constantly looking for savings in our contracts. We just approved a nice savings in our copier contract, $70,000 a year. We're always looking for attritional savings where possible. So we didn't eat that entire $1.5 million, but we're still left with a $1.4 million projected deficit. So each year we look at the costs that are really driving the district's budget. And I always find it simplest to present it in one simple graph. So our two largest costs that are driving the budget are employment costs. There are pension, or PSERS costs, which is a mandated contribution rate by the state. That's 34 cents of every dollar of salary goes towards pensions. And our healthcare cost has finally surpassed our debt service as our second largest non-salary cost in the district. And as of late, a lot of districts have been experiencing double-digit increases. As you recall, we've had 20% increases in our prescription cost. Fortunately, with our last labor union contract, we managed to mitigate some of those costs as reflected in our most recent outlook in our health insurance projections for next year. And we haven't been experiencing those double-digit increases, but we're still at 8%. We're still at a respectably high number. The other number look on here is transportation. And we talked about the MCIU charges. So the state froze those MCIU chargebacks during COVID, and you can see we experienced a significant drop, which was really unrealistic during COVID. It should have been more like this. But now, of course, we're making up for it in the current year. So this really does a nice job of reflecting cash flow related to transportation. And our charter school costs, after its large inflation during COVID, has somewhat leveled out. Our enrollment numbers in our charter schools are somewhat stable at this point. Another item I feel that it's very important to share. This is a financial implication graph of those mandated costs that the state has put in place, primarily driven by charter schools, primarily driven by pension costs, and primarily driven by mandated special education costs that are added services that don't come with any sort of additional funding. So if we look back at 2012, while the state may have funded its same proportional share versus us, we had a $12 million expense to cover all of these expenditures, which of course has ballooned to $26 million, with us having little ability to change that trajectory while still only receiving partial funding. So this entire difference has really been pushed on the taxpayers and the local taxes of Cheltenham, the burden. So it's really a tax shift from the state level down to the local level, forcing them to make more difficult decisions. Believe it or not, there was a point in time, a very brief point in time, where charter schools were funded 100% by the state. Now they fund 0%. So flipping from expenditures to the revenue side, one item in our revenues that is, as you can see, is very much a roller coaster year over year. Our investment earnings mirror the Federal Reserve rate very closely because, as you know, as a school district, we are limited to investments in very safe, very conservative investment vehicles. So right now, looking at this 5.5% reserve rate, we were earning more than 5.5% of some of our investments, which led to this year to a $3.4 million revenue line projected. We're already seeing some of the 5.5% investment rates dropping to 5.38, 5.33. And that's under the expectation that that is going to drop the rate within the next year. So last conversation was December's, kind of looks like a target date. But as we discussed last year, we were expecting that in January, and of course, inflation was still pushing that, keeping that number up. So we don't have a crystal ball, but we are seeing our experiencing our first drop in investment rates. Really trying to make this as exciting as possible. I won't spend a lot of time on this, but I like looking at this graph. It's showing.
It's
This is my favorite. This is my favorite graph.
Is that how?
I know it's good job.
So this is a very quick snapshot of revenues versus expenditures going back to 2013 and 14 through present. So over 10 years of historical performance for Cheltenham School District. You can see we had some very rough years in here. We had COVID, we had an expenditure drop, we had ESSER, we had a revenue increase, and we have interest income, which is also part of this upswing, but that's going to go away. So we're going to see, the same trend kind of happen with revenues and expenditures. And this does go out to 27, 28. I'm projecting, no tax increase, of course, and just comparing what that looks like to a basic, 2 to 3% expenditure increase that we experience in a trend line, to kind of look at, what we need to do long term going forward. We don't have a lot of assessment growth, so we're very much dependent on our tax rate to drive revenues and whatever happens with the state budget. All right, so going back to our $1.4 million deficit currently existing in our proposed final budget. What I did budget for on the revenue side is an increase to our basic ed subsidy as already proposed by the governor. I did budget an increase to our special ed subsidy as already proposed by the governor. At this point in time, with the advice of associations across the state that advise school districts, I don't feel comfortable budgeting a $2.2 million tax equity adjustment. It appears as if there's still too much political wrangling to really feel confident in that number. My guess is that number ends up working itself back into the basic ed formula in a revised, larger basic ed formula number than what I budgeted. But to be conservative and on that advice, I budgeted what I felt was appropriate. So some increase in the ed subsidy, but no tax equity adjustment at this point. So with that in mind, we're still left with a $1.4 million deficit, and the requirement to fund that $1.4 million deficit will result in a 1.4% increase in the millage rate of Cheltenham School District. It's important to note that there is also an increase in the homestead allotment this year. So for those of you who have signed up for the homestead adjustment for the real estate tax relief, you'll notice on your tax bill, you'll see this is your assessment, this is your tax bill. There'll be a line right underneath. This is your homestead adjustment, which is, as I'll show you later, is on average a $500 reduction from your real estate tax bill. And then this is your final tax bill due. So the state increased that number. So even with a 1.4% tax increase, the average tax bill will go up less than 1%. And even with a 1.4% tax increase, obviously we're never looking to increase taxes. We're still well below our state equine index of 5.3%. So with the efforts made over the past several years to reduce costs, to reduce operational expenditures, we felt like we were able to come in well below this number. And I included our market value personal income aid ratio. This is just a ratio that measures the relative wealth of the district and the state. If you're interested, the state publishes a ratio for every district. The smaller the number, the wealthier the district, the larger the number, less wealthy the district. The lowest number you can get is 1.5. There are some districts who are off the charts. Wealthy, their aid ratio is 1.5 versus 3.8. So I would call this relatively stagnant for the past 7 years. So in essence, it's a ratio of the value of our real estate tax assessment to our number of students and the value of our household income to number of students. All right, homestead exclusion, we just talked about that. The number was running at 3.5 million for a very long time, which is curious because back when the homestead exclusion was put in place at the turn of the century, 2000, it was promised to reduce real estate taxes, and we had 2 casinos then, and we had 48 casinos now, but yet we still only got $3.5 million. So they finally started releasing some of the money that was put into that fund in 22-23, which resulted in a homestead exemption went from $442 to $529. This year, another $600,000 bump. So that $530 will jump up to almost $600. So anyone who has signed up for the homestead exclusion will receive an additional amount offsetting the real estate taxes this upcoming year. Doing the rough math on what a 1.4% tax increase looks like. So using the median home assessment, again, this is assessment and not market value. The assessment in Montgomery County is significantly less than the market value of a home. Using the average assessment, that's approximately $111 a year, or $9.28 a month. If you pull back, and we were looking at a $60 adjustment, if you pull that off the $111, it's even less per year than what would hit each household on a median home assessment. And then just for illustrative purposes, I added a couple levels of assessment, which covers the broad, the majority of homes in Cheltenham Township. And to put our tax rate into context, I'm sure we've all heard it to death. Cheltenham Township has the highest tax rate in Montgomery County. It does. But in the last 10 years, Cheltenham School District has had some of the lowest tax increases. And the reason I include this spreadsheet is just to show that some of the problems in the district have existed for a long time. And within the more recent history, obviously the district, the board has made steps to do everything it can to address and take into account the fact that it does have one of the highest tax rate, the highest tax rate in the county. And I would like to point out that these districts below us, most of them have received significant increases in basic ed subsidy over the last several years, larger than what Cheltenham has, as measured by the market value personal income ratio. All right, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time on these. This is all the actual verbiage of the items that need to be approved at the next board meeting. The adoption of the budget, the adoption of the dollar amount set, the approval of the tax levy, the transfer tax, the mercantile tax, the profits on businesses, the local service tax, and the school real estate tax millage is all included in that board action. The approval and the acceptance of the homestead money, which, as we saw, had increased to $597 per homestead, a total allotment of $4.6 million to the district, and a reduction in assessment on average of $11,402. Next slide gets even more exciting. The improvement of the installment payments, I'm not going to read them off. These are the items we approved during the last board meeting. So because investment income has become so important to the district, and we didn't get a chance to discuss it before the last board meeting, most of our funds lie in Pliget and Pislaf. Those are two fully collateralized. You don't like that circle?
Those, no, it's like the like possessed. Continue.
You didn't pick them up there.
Clearly,
No.
clearly an accountant making up.
It's like you kind of read.
So not only are we in extraordinarily safe investments, we are fully collateralized, extraordinarily safe investment um, institutions with PISLAF and PLIG. So we don't have, you hear horror stories of districts who invest their money in CDs to try and grab an extra 10 basis points, and some municipal golf club in California that goes broke and they lose. We don't have any of that. We are about it. We are extraordinarily safe. We don't even expand into the additional corporate bond holdings we're allowed to, because ultimately it's not worth the risk. All right. So last board meeting, we approved our cooperative purchasing vehicles. These are all of the different organizations that house a lot of the vendors that we buy from that are pre-bid. I don't know how many fee businesses are part of this, these cooperative purchasing arrangements, but I'd be curious to see, because this is where most districts do their buying from. Approval of purchasing agents, approval of insurance, approval of lunch prices that remain the same, approval of free breakfast, reapproval of Whitson's as our lunch food service provider. And the last item to be approved on the 25th will be the feasibility study as presented by KCBA. So they'll take, in essence, what you've already heard through several presentations. They'll formalize that in the final report, which will include recommendations, and that will be our official action report to work off of going forward. I know I went through that quickly because we had already had a late start. Any questions on anything that was presented?
Since Dr. Whiting did not get a chance to ask, but I'll start with you and then hop up to you.
Thank you. And these are questions as a new board member, so I'm trying to understand. This is one of the most important things that the board does. Thank you for this presentation, very thorough. And so I want to make sure that I'm totally clear on how we're thinking about this, given some of the things that we have coming up. The two major outstanding things I can think of from a budgeting standpoint that are kind of variables at the moment are the contract negotiations with the CEA, and obviously the capital planning that we're doing in relationship to the potential changing of the structure of our school systems. And I just wondered, I know some of that is going to be unknown at the moment, but I just wondered for in particular, the most pressing thing seems to be the CEA negotiation resulting in some kind of change in our budgeting. How are you thinking about that budgeting for the coming year in terms of just approach in general? Because obviously we have a tax increase involved in this, and I'm just wondering if you're thinking about this generally as part of this budget, and if not, then we're thinking about it leveling it in future budgets.
So typically in collective bargaining agreements, if we don't have them settled by the end of the school year, then we don't budget again. So
Got it.
Everything is as budgeted is staying.
Great. Okay. So we'll be thinking in the future for whatever kind of negotiations come out of that. We'll be thinking about that for future years in terms of our one index and all that kind of stuff. And then similarly for the capital improvements, that will be in a future debt service that we'll acquire, not in this budget at all, not in consideration, correct?
Yeah, so if we did want to do a project that required some sort of debt service, there would typically be a design period that could be a year or longer. Then there would be a period immediately after that where you conduct a bid to determine the cost of a project. At that point, you would issue a bond to pay for it. So we're at least the next budget cycle outside of that.
Okay, great. Thank you for the quick service.
Thank you.
Thank you for all of this information. I enjoyed all the graphs. Question about the state budget and anticipated release. The first question is, do you have any information on when we might?
So I've only been doing this 8 years, but whenever there's a proposal that includes a lot of new things and a lot of money involved, it's almost like a bellwether that this budget is going to drag because everyone's going to fight over how it's spent. And that was no different this year.
Yeah.
We had the findings of the basic ed, exactly correct me if I'm wrong, basic ed funding commission, and the state has made measures to address it in the past by changing the basic ed formula. So I think it's going to come down to how much money they want to stick into that basic ed formula that is going to redistribute funds, of which Cheltenham has been a benefactor. Not as directly as this proposed equity adjustment, but it has slowly shifted funds closer to your mortgage.
So it's unlikely that we'll see that budget before June 25th.
It's looking,
Yeah.
yes, I think.
Okay, because I was just thinking if we were going to receive funds that, it looked like we were due, that we wouldn't need to raise the tax rate. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay.
Last I heard, you had one side of the aisle wants to decrease taxes with the money, and the other side who wants to invest in public education. So very, very far.
Far apart. Okay, just clarifying that
I'll
if we got those extra.
I'll just add one point of clarification to that comment, which is just, this is pretty regular that we don't bake in the upcoming state budgets increasing to our budget we passed, but next year that will be reflected. I actually think last year we got 4 that we had budgeted for, and as a result, we are not needing to look at a 2.2% increase or whatever because of the increase that we had last year.
I did budget some because I do think there'll be money, there'll be increases to basic ed subsidy. I think it would have been irresponsible not to budget something. I didn't put that in there.
Thank you, that was for just clarification.
Any other questions? Mr. Williams?
Did you? All right.
You're the chair, recognize the question.
I think chair person. So just thinking about the special program costs that I know, raw programming back in-house and still growing and developing that, just seeing that was the increase year over year. Just how thoughts around like predictability in that realm, is that still an area, and Dr. Scriven, and maybe that's, maybe there's a big different update, but just thinking generally speaking about the fact that there were things that we acknowledged we weren't quite sure we were going to need or know exactly when we need or how we needed to fund them. Bringing the autism support program back in-house, I'm thinking of that one specifically. Is there generally our predictability? Is that program, are we there? Are we still looking and expecting that there's going to be some evolution in that space?
So some of the reason why the cost was so low the past 2 years is staff. So we tried to hire and we needed staff that weren't available, and we needed subs to fill in vacancies they weren't available. So part of that increase is us getting back to the number of staff that we need based on IEPs, because IEPs call for, of which we were always trying to fill 100%. I think now we're to that point where we're providing the services like we should. In the past, we did not have 100% staffing. Not that we weren't providing the services, but we weren't providing as well as we needed. So sometimes that reduction in cost is always a good thing. In this case, COVID severed a lot of employment relationships with the IU, with the school district. A lot of those bridges had to be reestablished, and a lot of new staff had to be brought in to fill in those gaps.
Okay, and we think we're generally in a better place, or back to standard, if you will, or in any way.
I think we're close, almost back to 100%. We're still using more subs than we would like to versus our in-house personnel. But that's what I mean by back 100%. We'd like to have those be district staff dedicated to our buildings and not subs. We're still relying on subs. So.
Okay, yeah, appreciate that. Thank you.
Mr. Evans.
First, if it's any affirmation or consolation, one of the most asked questions is around, for me, is our taxes. Why are the taxes so high? Things like that. So I often repeat a lot of the information. It's like, well, where do I start? Where do you want me to start? How deep do you want me to go? So definitely this information is helpful, not just in review purposes, but when we could go communicate to the community. This is what I'm talking about the most. So appreciate it. When I'm continuing on that, when I was running What I was told by some folks was like, you know, we found a lot of attritional savings. There's probably nothing else. We're probably not gonna find a lot of savings. But every budget process, I want to congratulate the diligence of you and your team, because there continue to be savings that are identified that are annually we can recoup some of those funds. So that is something that it may be like another part of the process. It feels like to you, but it does really stand out.
Don't thank me. Thank the curriculum department, thank the principals, because they're the ones who find the space and make the sacrifice.
Yeah.
I'm just the person who says, find me a person, find me nutritional savings to fill this gap. I'm not the person who actually.
Well, I'll flip it. Thank you to the team and Mr. Swigert. Thank you to the team. For anybody listening, honestly, for the record, then, but honestly, that takes a lot of diligence when you're finding things on the margins. And so I won't go too much farther, but that's honestly, it's definitely appreciated. And move on. This part is really communicating our success as we talk about the budget. Like it could be even like really like, what are the top 5 things to know about this budget? And throughout the year in our agendas, we see things about inclusive schools, MTSS programs, you know, new summer learning resources, meaningful teacher PD, mentoring services. We've got the Empowerment Center coming up, identifying savings. Like we've got a lot of good things that people wouldn't know unless they're tracking our agendas for running back. And I don't say, there's a lot of great information online. And Kevin and the communications team, they do a good job of like talking about what's going on. But specifically as it relates to the budget, again, this top 5 things to know or something along those lines, we can be very clear about how we can celebrate, how we can get ahead of the narrative around, okay, well, our taxes are really high. But the first thing I say is like, well, they're going to our children, and this is how. These are the things we're funding. And that's an opportunity for us to, you know, just be very clear about where these dollars are going for folks who aren't in the weeds in our processes like we are. So that top 5, that again, this is a communication thing. That top 5 things to know, or just having like what are the major investments that we want to highlight in this budget is something that can help us communicate our success and get ahead of, you know, possibly what we need to. If we have to increase taxes more in the future, we've got a foundation of where do those dollars go. And I think that's it.
Any other more questions or comments?
Just one more kind of following Mr. F's statement. The chart showing the increase over time in comparison to other school districts, I think that is a great thing that I will be shelving away in my memory, knowing that we are in the bottom quartile on average of school districts in Montgomery County in recent memory in raising taxes is a good statement. I don't think, you know, knowing we all pay the highest taxes in the county, it is encouraging to see that we have made such progress in making sure we are not increasing the burden beyond it being considerate of our tax base for their funding. And they are funding, they're funding our kids, as Mr. F said. So I think it's good to see both the saving side of it and also, as Mr. F says, the assets.
Not every school district is made equal. There's 500 school districts in the state, and you know, we talked about this before. We have a lot of tax exempt property in this district. We have almost no industrial base. We don't have a lot of, you know, office space. You know, these are types of properties that bring in revenues to the district with not additional students, and Sheldon has very little of that.
Thank you. Not to repeat anyone, but thank you. We love graphs too. I don't carry them, look at the movie every day, but I mean, to Mr. Epps and Dr. Wedding's point, having these as not just having that visual in my mind is helpful when talking to people in the community in the coming months over the next year. My one question is just this last slide actually is, and maybe we don't know yet, do we have an action item on this, or is it just that KCBA is presenting an update?
So we pretty much the April 2nd, 2024 meeting summarized a lot of the final feasibility studies of what it looked like. they're gonna put that in a final digestible format, which can be, the motion is to kind of accept it in the minutes as a report reviewed by the board, as opposed to a formal official action.
And will that include I believe that the community survey was after the April 2nd meeting, or was it, right? So will it include that as well on our end?
So the
We
community survey,
presented that at another meeting.
we did the last month.
Thank you.
So I will jump in on a couple of things and folks can ask additional comments or questions. But to that point around the feasibility study, at some point, we're going to need to move forward with the design phase of whatever the recommendation is. So just to clarify, would this accepting of the study represent sort of the green light to move forward with that next phase?
That's correct.
Okay, so then my second question is, will we have an opportunity, because last presentation we received, sort of the next step that I walked away understanding was, we will be presented with those recommendations and maybe have a chance to ask questions and do a little bit of deliberation about it before we vote. So do we anticipate having that opportunity before the 25th or maybe as part? And I don't know if that's a question for Dr. Scriven or for you.
Dr. Scribble can try it.
I'm happy to repeat, by the way, Dr. Scriven.
Yeah, no, I heard you. It will not happen prior to the 25th or during the 25th. So,
That's fine, yeah,
and that meeting is gonna be a little longer than we had first anticipated.
understood. That makes sense. And it's not like anything's gonna be a wild, so we've been talking about this for months, so I'm not trying to imply that it should have been for the 25th, but that's helpful to know in terms of the process. And another quick question about, a comment following up on Mr. F's comment about communicating. We have in the past included a flyer with the tax bill that does a little bit of explanation about basically what your money is going towards. And I just wanted to mention that as something that, an asset that could be put together. I don't know if that could be something that we leverage a third party to help put together, because I know that is a real thing. Or if Mr. Kaufman would cover something like that, but that's just, I wanted to mention, even if it was just those 5 bullet points or some sort of slide. I know we've been afforded that in the past by the tax office.
So what I'm working on now is kind of mimicking what other business managers, more experienced business managers, very well-respected business managers have done, is they followed recommendations from the Association of School Business Officials, which is a nationwide organization. And they have this best practices checklist in terms of what information to put out through budget. So using a similar format for those reports that have already been put in place by other districts, we're working on pushing out a similar report. The report they recommend to push out is like 120 pages. I don't think that's useful for anyone. So I've been working with Nelson, the new assistant. We printed out a report. I went through and said, not on this page, not on. So it's down to 40 with lots of graphs, with lots of, kind of state of the district information. What does our enrollment look like? What does our demographic look like? What is our historical performance financially? So kind of that information to educate the public for anyone who really enjoys that kind of stuff.
And you're saying, just to clarify, that would be a report that put on our website.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, not mailed with the bill.
But we can
And so
take that
in the bill, you could point to that and say, go to this. That makes sense. Thank you. Yeah,
We could focus that to a flyer.
sure. Yeah, I mean, that would be great too. Although, 40-page document with your tax bill.
I feel like you're getting your money.
You really, yeah, exactly. Thank you. That, last thought, because you mentioned the TIF, and this is not a question to be answered now by anyone, because that TIF was passed however many years ago, and it came with some benefits to the community and to the school district in compensation for the tax abatement. I don't know if anyone's been keeping track of whether both ends of the bargain are being held up. So since we are now actually in this business of return of doing our side of the tip, I just wanted to raise that. That might be a conversation for the liaison group. But it just occurred to me, those are supposed to be public grounds that people walk on, but theoretically there was an amphitheater that our students would be able to perform at. Things like that, and I know that was a previous administration, so it might not be on top of either of your radars.
Thank you for bringing that up.
Absolutely.
We need to take a deeper look.
Right. Thanks all for, were there any other questions or comments from the board? And likewise from the public.
Don't see any.
Then I'll just conclude by reiterating the thanks to this committee, to the administration, your office, Josh, for the amount of effort that's put into this budgeting process. It is reflected in the numbers, and I'm really thankful that we have over the past 10 years been able to address one of the most vocalized needs of this community to keep things under control and move in the right direction, while also providing our students with an excellent education. So thank you so much, and with that, I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
All in favor?
Aye.
I accept.